Welcome, everybody, once again to another episode of Writers and Fighters, a podcast. You know me, or at least you should, because I'm your host, AJ Ortega. This show features weekly interviews with people in the writing world and people in the fighting world. On today's episode, I have Prose Hernandez Diaz calling in from California. He's a great poet, and I had him on because I really like his book titled The Fire Eater. It's a book of prose poems, so definitely stick around for that interview because he reads a couple of pieces from that collection as well. But before the interview portion, just a quick recap of UFC 264. So I just want to mention a couple of fighters getting their comeuppance during that event. And I think of the word Schadenfreude, which is like when you take joy or delight at someone else's failure or misfortune or humiliation. And two fights come to mind in that card in regards to that idea, including the main event, which I'll get to in a moment. But a few fights before that in the heavyweight division, Tai Tuivasa fought Greg Hardy, and Greg Hardy's a former NFL player and domestic abuser and things like this. Got popped for drugs at one point, I think cocaine. And just not really a great dude or a good person, doesn't have a good character. Whereas Tai Tuivasa is a fan favorite. He's from Australia, and he's of indigenous, Aboriginal Australian, and Samoan heritage. And you can see that in his tattoos. He's a big boy, very powerful hands. I saw him about a year ago at one of the Dubai events, and he knocked out Stefan Struve, the Swedish skyscraper, a big 7-footer, and he subsequently retired. And in this fight, Greg Hardy comes out and is putting pressure on from the start. But Tuivasa's chopping him down with leg kicks, and it's a really good strategy against a former NFL player who's way fast for a heavyweight and really has explosive power, tree trunk-like legs. And so Greg Hardy at a certain point lands a right hand, and that stuns Tuivasa, and he's in trouble. But Tuivasa returns that with a left, and that knocks down Hardy. Like, knocks him out. He's, like, out, and he follows up with some hammer fist, and the ref steps in. And so Tuivasa wins KO via punches, and he picked up Performance of the Night for that first round knockout. And that's a $75,000 bonus. He jumps up onto the cage and does the shoey, which is where you pour a beer into a shoe and drink it. I guess it's a rugby thing. I've seen it. I know he does this. This is one of his things when he wins. It's a celebration. But I guess they do that in rugby, like if you score. I don't know shit about rugby. But so that was really cool. And on the way out, as he's walking in celebration backstage, he does a couple more. He does, I think, 3 total on his walk back that fans, pulled off a shoe and poured a beer in there. And the last one, somebody poured some of Dustin Poirier's hot sauce in it, and he still drank it, but he made a face afterwards and said it was really gross in an interview after the fight. So that was pretty cool, pretty funny, neat to see that celebration. Speaking of Dustin Poirier and that hot sauce, well, Dustin Poirier was in the main event against Conor McGregor. What an interesting fight. This is a trilogy. This is their third meeting, and they were 1-1. They've each won once against each other. The most recent fight being about 6 months ago. And so the fight is really scrappy. Conor McGregor's back to using his very wide stance, no longer that boxing kind of stance. He has that wider stance, and he's utilizing leg kicks and going for those calf kicks on Dustin Poirier, which was what was used against him in the last fight in a huge way. So now he's implementing this, and he's using this. And he's finding some success with it. He's getting Dustin in the calf and in the thigh. He's loading up that left hand, which is his biggest asset there in the octagon. Dustin Poirier is winning the round decisively, I believe. There's some pretty vicious ground and pound towards the end of the round. There's some sort of confusion towards the end, and Dustin lets Conor up, but is complaining to Herb Dean, the referee, about something. Later, I heard an interview and found out that it was because Conor was on the ground on his back and holding the glove, the inside of the glove at the wrist, the cuff of the glove of Poirier, and using that to pull him down and do up kicks, right? Like, so he couldn't get away from the up kicks. He's holding his hand by the glove, which you can't do. And so Poirier was protesting and finally gets away from that and wants to stand up with him as a result, right? But there's only a few seconds left in the round. So last maybe, 10, 15 seconds or so. And Conor steps back awkwardly with his left foot, and it breaks on him. And he screams, and you see his mouth wide open. He falls on his butt backwards towards the cage. Poirier lands some punches there. Round is over. But he can't get up because his leg broke right above the ankle, the lower part of the shin. And so now there's speculation, I was looking at, that those kicks he was doing against Poirier, those kicks he was throwing against Poirier might have caused fractures or things like this. And I even saw some footage where his leg didn't have all of its integrity as he stepped on it until that last moment where it was all she wrote. And so the thing here now is what happened after. Conor is sitting against the cage in the sitting position while they tend to his leg, and he's in agony, and he's yelling, he's cursing at Dustin Poirier, and objecting and all these things, and making sure that they call it a doctor stoppage. He's yelling, doctor stoppage, doctor stoppage. I mean, it's still a TKO. I mean, officially it's a TKO by doctor stoppage in the 5th minute of the first round. And that's how they officially score it when that happens, when they can't, when you can't officially start the second round, it is scored as the end of the first. TKO, technical knockout by doctor stoppage. But he's so upset, he's yelling at Dustin Poirier and yelling about his wife, apparently, and stuff like this, really nasty stuff. And it's in those moments where I'm like, it's hard to feel bad for the dude with the broken leg in a freak kind of accident, because he stepped awkwardly or whatever the case may be. Maybe I shouldn't be so happy that he is going to be sidelined for so long. But I think that also comes from the fact that he's been a fan favorite, but also a favorite of the boss, Dana White, because Conor McGregor brings money. These bad antics and the trash talking, for whatever reason, do draw money. For this match, he got $5 million, I believe was the deal, and Dustin Poirier got $1 million. And Dustin Poirier was favored. He was ranked higher and all these things, right? And so when he's being like the favorite of the company, he gets opportunities that maybe other guys should get. And Dana White's already talking about making a 4th fight with Poirier and McGregor because this one ended with this freak leg break. And I can't say that I agree with that. I don't think Conor, I think they're done. I think Dustin won and he needs to move on to bigger and better things like the championship. And Conor, I don't see him as the same fighter. So I don't know if we can keep that story going where, Conor's a great mixed martial artist. I think maybe his time might be done. I think he's always going to get fights. I don't think he's championship material, though. Right? And just like in the earlier fight with Greg Hardy, he leapfrogged a whole bunch of guys because he has that NFL background and things like this. And he was in headlines for bad reasons, but he's a name. And so he leapfrogged a bunch of guys in the heavyweight division and maybe got opportunities a little early in his career because of the notoriety of who he is. And so with both those guys losing and having to regroup and all that kind of stuff, I think it gives opportunity for some of the other guys to jump in there and get in the mix, without getting passed over for at least these two in these 2 different divisions. All right, y'all, enough fight talk. So now let's get into the interview portion with Jose Hernandez Diaz. Again, he calls in from California. Great poet, great writer. We talk about all sorts of stuff, finish up with some fight talk. So I hope you enjoy. All right, y'all, and I am joined here with Jose Hernandez Diaz, poet calling in on Zoom from California. How are you doing, Jose?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
And so maybe tell the audience a little bit about who you are in terms of your writing, your poetry, and what you want to tell the audience before we get talking here.
Well, I'm a poet, prose poet, and flash fiction writer from Southeast Los Angeles County, Norwalk, California. I grew up in Orange County, though. And I started writing in high school and junior college and my bachelor's at Berkeley and did my MFA at Antioch. And last year I published a chapbook of prose poems called The Fire Eater. And I also have a couple of full-length manuscripts that I'm currently submitting for consideration for publication.
Great, man. Yeah, the Fire Eater, that book, that's what kind of got my attention. You know, I was able to click through and Google your name and read some of your stuff. And then on Twitter, you'd posted, some signed copies for X amount of dollars. And I was like, yeah, I'd rather, I like getting books directly from the writers themselves. So I reached out to you, got your book. Really cool. I like the prose poetry, and we'll get to that very specific genre in a moment. But yeah, I also saw real quickly. I'm a big dog person. Tell me about your dog. I saw your dog on Twitter. You posted your dog a couple hours ago and said, "Here's my proofreader taking a break."
Oh yeah, yeah. I like to mess around with him, pretend he's a human. Mm-hmm. And we found him on the streets here in the condominiums where we live. He was just a stray for a couple years, and we would bring him in the holidays sometimes, and then eventually we just kept him permanently. Gave him a haircut. Now he's like a brand new pup, brand new dog.
That's great, man. What's the dog's name?
His name is Rufio.
Rufio, great. Yeah. That's awesome. And so tell me about your initial interest in reading and then how you got into poetry specifically.
It started in high school. I was a football player, actually, a cornerback on the high school team. And I didn't really care about school, to be honest with you. I was getting like C's and D's and a B here and there. And then my high school English teacher noticed that on the language arts portion of the STAR testing, I was getting high marks. And she said, well, you should be getting an A in this class then. And that sort of made me feel better about myself, and she encouraged me to read more and write more. And I started reading on my own. And then in junior college, I continued to write short stories primarily. And it wasn't until I got to UC Berkeley that I started experimenting with poetry. It was more like spoken word style, I think, initially. And then started reading the beats like Ginsberg. And so, yeah, and then eventually I did my MFA and just devoted 2 years to reading a lot and working on the manuscript. And here we are.
And so before you got into poetry specifically and you were reading and kind of, discovering literature, were there other genres or other interests, like creatively or literature-wise, that you were into? Or was it specifically just poetry, from the get-go?
No, I mean, initially I was into like painting and abstract painting and street art, graffiti. Had friends that grew up doing that. Myself, I didn't do that, but I was a fan of it. So yeah, mostly painting and also short fiction, short stories. The novel, I didn't really have the attention span for it, honestly. But if it's a short novel, maybe I would read it. But mostly short stories and music as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the visual stuff, graffiti art and stuff like that, I think is really cool. And also the short story again, but that I like that observation that the novels are long. That's a whole lot of a whole lot of pages to stick with and stuff like that. Whereas short stories are digestible, right? I guess was it who said that the short story should be read in one sitting?
That's about right for me too.
Yeah, I forget the author that said that. Somebody will correct us at some point. And so, why gravitate to poetry then? At a certain point, you gravitate to poetry. You discover the beats. Why that in terms of your creative outlet? You said you're already into college at that point, right?
Right. Well, honestly, to be perfectly honest, I started reading like Petrarch and the sonneteers, the Italian sonneteers, writing about a woman that he loved that he could never get. And there was like a girl around the neighborhood that I had a crush on that I was too shy to talk to. So I just started reading that, and I would start writing my own love poems.
There we go.
And then I started discovering more contemporary verse, and I realized you didn't have to sound so like, so ancient or outdated,
Right.
And I sort of picked up the pace and became more contemporary with my styles.
Yeah, that's one of the things once we start reading, and the first things that are, quote unquote serious literature, they sound a certain way. And then we think,
Right.
well, that's what literature sounds like. And then, hopefully we get taught out of that at a certain point and think that, there's room for all sorts of voices from all sorts of eras, right?
Definitely. Especially what they teach in the high schools tends to be more like, Shakespeare or Milton or something like that.
Yeah, the high school era, that's when I was like reading the most, but definitely not for school, right? I was reading a lot, but none of the books that they were assigning me, because
Right.
again, I was like, I don't get it. But there's these other books that I do get, and I was consuming them, right?
I also want to mention that the public library is where I started reading more Latinx writers and discovered Octavio Paz and Neruda and most of these on my own. And that opened up another world for me too, in the sense of like believing in myself as a writer. And when you see, Latinx authors that are successful and winning awards, and I think it helps a lot. Just like I think seeing a Mexican American teacher would help a lot growing up for the youth.
Oh, yeah, those things, of course, yeah. Once you figure out, like, oh, our stories are being taught, our poetry is being taught, our music is being consumed, and these kinds of
Right.
things. And so, that's great, and good public libraries have those kinds of programming, and, and will highlight those books according to their communities and things like this.
Definitely.
And so that's awesome. It's a great resource. The knowledge is out there. Again, that's, we pay taxes for those things, so go ahead and go check out those books.
Definitely.
Go check out those books. And so we zero in on poetry, and within poetry, you go pretty specific from what I can observe, and a little bit of what you've mentioned, the prose poems, that specific kind of subgenre. I'm kind of a fan of that. I'm particularly a fan of that. And you also mentioned that you do flash fiction, and so there's like a Venn diagram, right? And they're kind of close, those kinds of things. But why prose poems? I like the way they look, I like the way they read, but why did you gravitate that way?
Well, initially I was writing mostly politically charged poems about immigration, the border, etc. when I first started writing. And then I discovered James Tate, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning prose poet. And I was not aware that prose poetry existed. It was like 2015.
Okay.
14, I think 14. And it just opened up my world in terms of you don't have to focus on line break, and it's kind of like a little short story. You could be absurd with it, playful. It didn't necessarily have to be about my life. I could make things up and get creative with it. And then seeing that Tate had won all these awards, like the National Book Award and the Pulitzer, for example, it was sort of like, it can be fun and it can also be serious,
Yeah, I think it's a really cool way to present, again, a series of poems in this book, specifically The Fire Eater, but that when you're not worrying about line breaks and things like that, and you're just thinking about word choice and the rhythm within sentences without, and it looks like a graph, right? It looks like a little paragraph. And so I think that's really cool. It's also a risk at a certain point too, but I do think that you kind of figured out your thing, right? Or at least your thing for now. But yeah, I think it's great.
Also, like for my full-length manuscript, the first half of both of them is linear verse. So it's poetry, traditional poetry with line breaks, and tends to be about my life, my family, inspirations, and more realistic and Latinx-based poetry. And so that's the first half, and the second half is the prose poems. So I've never really seen that too much. So I think we'll see how it goes with the full lengths.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. I also looked in your bio and stuff like this that you've also
Right.
been on the other side of the writing world in terms of being a reader for lit journals, an editor for magazines and things like this. What
Right.
about that in terms of how you approach writing since you've seen the other side of it, like how these voices get out there?
Well, first of all, on the other side, you see that there's so many talented writers out there submitting their work, and plenty of good work gets rejected. So you learn to sort of get thick skin and not take it so personal. And it's about clicking with the editors, but at the same time, a lot of the work, like I mentioned, we're doing the finalists right now for one of our chapbook prizes, and like I want to publish everything I see. You know what I mean? Like, so there's only a certain amount of space for the winners, and that can be tough when you're submitting your manuscripts out there. But I think that motivates me to just keep submitting my work because I see that it's a bit of a crapshoot and a little bit of a luck. And as long as you're confident in the work and it makes a couple, finalist lists every now and then or something, tweak it here and there, but just keep submitting it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach it in that there's several variables and that so long as you're getting some sort of feedback or some kind of positive responses that take it into consideration, make adjustments if you believe in it, and keep
Right.
on trying to hustle that stuff. What other advice might you give young writers when they're trying to get their voices out there? And when I say young writers, I mean young in their careers as writers.
I would just say that for me, reading a couple years in the MFA program, like very seriously, and I read like 100 books one year or something like that.
Nice.
But I did not really have much of a social life for a while, and that's all I was doing. I don't read as much as nowadays. I tend to read just for work nowadays, and every now and then, a book or something. But yeah, initially finding your voice through reading and sharpening up your forms and experimenting with it, and so yeah, I would say reading, volunteering for a journal as a reader or editor, and keep submitting. I think oftentimes writers are scared to submit, or they just get a lot of rejections, and they can be intimidating. So try to submit to new journals as well, and just keep at it. I've been in some of these journals that I'm in, like I was just in Salamander last week. I've been submitting there for like 6 years, so.
Right, right.
And it's not necessarily that I was submitting bad work before, but certain things click more, or also stuff gets accepted elsewhere. So just keep submitting, I think, is the main thing.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think that's really good advice for young writers out there. That when you work with volume, right? It's like, okay, well, let me send these kinds of poems to these kinds of journals, and it's a lot about figuring what lines up with your voice, right? And yeah, and so
Right.
yeah, the spreading it around is the name of the game.
Cast a wide net.
Exactly, cast that wide net for sure.
Yeah.
And so, Jose, I am holding your book here from Texas
Right.
Review Press, The Fire Eater. Yeah, shout out to Texas. I'm a Texas boy, so Huntsville, Texas, Texas Review Press.
Nice.
I like small press books, and I like actually small books. And again, the
Right.
economy of the size of this book, the cover's really beautiful with this matte black finish, and the title's cool. There's fire on the cover. Maybe tell me about the title, maybe the cover, and then we'll get into some of the content here.
Well, the title is the lead poem, the lead prose poem in the collection. Um, I wrote it a couple years ago, that prose poem, when sort of family, I think, Mexican American families can be with poetry can be a hard sell, I think. So they weren't really believing in me, even though I got like NEA fellowship and things like that. So I remember just asking somebody, do you believe that I'll make it as a writer? And they said no. And then I was just like, wow. And then so that's when I wrote the Fire Eater, in terms of somebody being a circus performer being abandoned by the family, left on the street to perform, and trying to make it as a solo act.
Very cool, very cool. And so they're all prose poems, but it is also split up into parts. And there's
Right.
repetition within some of the poems and things like this, but it's, again, deliberately it is broken up. What about
Right.
putting the manuscript together and organizing this book?
Well, the first section, they are third-person surreal prose poems. The second section is the Man in the Pink Floyd shirt section,
Yeah.
where there's a series of prose poems about a man in the Pink Floyd shirt. And then the last section is a series of prose poems about a skeleton. So that's how it ended up separating into 3 parts.
So when maybe conceiving the book and figuring out, the front to back kind of journey we're going to take,
Right.
those repeated images or repeated themes, did you have those kind of lined out already, or do you write your poems and then figure out how they're grouped later?
Yeah, no, I think I just wrote. I didn't start out wanting to write a series of Man in the Pink Floyd shirt prose poems or the skeleton one. I just wrote one prose poem. I believe it's called "The Balloon and the Helicopter," and that was the first one I wrote from that series. And then I saw that there was room to explore more because there was a lot of room for experimentation there. And then later, when I wrote my Man in the Chicano Batman shirt series, that's when in that one I knew that I was going to write a series, because I saw how it worked out with the Pink Floyd one. So I have a series of those, and I have one called "A Man in the Rage Against the Machine" shirt. So you can see the similarities there, and just so yeah, I think initially I just started writing off poem by poem, and then I saw that I could make a series out of these.
And so with that repeated idea of man in a blank shirt, again, Pink Floyd shirt, Batman shirt,
Right.
Is that something that you see like in actuality and in reality, and as kind of stewed in your brain, and then you sit in front of your computer or your notepad and kind of churn out some ideas starting with that image?
I think the bands and the musicians that I select for the shirt prose poems, they have to be very special to me.
Cool.
Like I did one about MF Doom as well.
Nice.
And in real life, I actually buy the shirts and I wear them. And
cool.
So I don't have a lot of band or musician shirts, but the ones I do have are very special to me and represents a part of my life that I remember just listening to MF Doom a lot, and it would make me feel like more positive and just relax and listen to it, In my rage days, I was more rebellious and like,
Right.
Against everything. So they all kind of represent certain points of my life, but they're so special to me. And yeah, you take bits and pieces from, a trip to Venice Beach last week or riding the subway in, 2008 or something like that. Some graffiti you saw on a bench or something. It's like a collage of sorts, or you sort of base it on the experience and improvise from there.
I get you. I like that kind of. It's a similar way that I approach certain writing projects or poetry projects or something. Start there with that little nugget of whatever you see or hear, even, right, and then just kind of roll
Right.
from there. I dig it. And so, would you be down to read a poem or two from your book? What do you think, man?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have any suggestions, or I could just.
No, I'll leave it entirely up to you.
Okay.
We'll let people know what you're reading, and it'd be great.
So the first one I'm going to read is The Dragon and the Coyote.
Great.
And it's in the first section, page 20. The Dragon and the Coyote. A man looked into a mirror, but he didn't recognize himself. Instead, he saw a dragon and a coyote engaged in a game of chess. The dragon moved first, middle pawn, 2 spaces. Then the coyote parroted the move. They stared into each other's eyes. Neither budged. After 3 hours, they called it a draw. The dragon flapped its scarlet wings and flew toward a nearby mountain. The coyote began to howl a lullaby. When the man eventually stopped looking into the mirror, he realized he's the dragon and he's the coyote. It's always been that way.
That's
Another
great.
one, or
Yeah, dude, that was great. Yeah, I dig that one. That's on page 20 of The Fire Eater. The Dragon and the Coyote. Got two graphs there. It's
yep.
Yeah, I dig it. What else you have, man?
And then the next one I'm going to read is called The Fire, and it's on page 3 of the collection, and it was published in the Cincinnati Review. The Fire. A man woke up in a burning building. He ran to the front door. It was jammed. Then he threw a chair to the window. It shattered and glass fell everywhere. He was careful as he climbed out of the window. It was a 3-story building. A preacher was down at the bottom, waiting to catch him. He jumped into the preacher's arms. On impact, they both transformed into pigeons. They flew away from the fire, far away from the fire.
Beautiful. What do you think is the advantage of, and I say this as a fan of this type of writing, what do you think is the advantage of the content being less abstract and more concrete and deliberate in terms of what the images are and the little ride we're taking in this poem?
Well, I think there's that. There's the mixture of the realism and the surrealism, and I think if it was just surrealism, it might come off as completely like off the wall, left field. But when you mix in the relatable moment of the fire and the door being jammed and throwing a chair to the window, we could visualize all this as realistic. And then you jump out the window and it's a preacher. And then as you impact with the preacher, they turn into pigeons. That is no longer real. Now we're real. But like I said, we took baby steps to get there in terms of things that were believable with the imagery. And now I think we sell it a little easier, when you mix it like that.
Yeah, right. Like if you kind of pad those kinds of fantastical, surreal moments with things that are very concrete, very harnessed in our reality, that you can get that effect. No, I love that. It's great.
Yeah.
And so, what projects do you have next? You said you have some manuscripts in the works that are kind of getting out there. Again, this one, The Fire Eater from Texas Review Press. What else you got coming up?
So I got a full length called the first full length called The Parachutist, and it's from like the past 7 years of my writing, and it's half, like I was mentioning, half poetry, half prose poetry, and then another full length manuscript called The Magician, which is very similar in the sense of half poetry, half prose poetry. Whereas the first manuscript has mostly like the Man in the Pink Floyd shirt series. The second one has like the Man in the Chicano Batman shirt and Rage Against the Machine and MF Doom series. I think they're different, but have some structural similarities.
Very cool. Very cool.
So right now I'm just submitting the individual poems and to magazines and the full lengths to competitions, and we'll see how it goes.
Good, man. Great. We're gonna wish you luck on all that stuff and hope you get some positive feedback on that stuff, and we can read more of your things.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And so this is the Writers and Fighters podcast. I always ask my writers, do you have any background or interest in fighting or combat sports? And, feel free to think outside the box with this question, but you're well established as a writer. What about the fighting side? Anything interesting there for you?
I was more of a lover growing up. I played football, but I was like...
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, it's close.
Yeah, I played football and actually played. I was a all-county team. But I didn't really like hitting. I liked more intercepting the ball. And at that point, I was in good shape. But, my friends were more like violent and into like football and MMA and all that. After football, they became instructors in MMA even.
Oh, cool.
And I kind of drifted away from them and started reading more. And it wasn't until like a few years ago that I started incorporating boxing into my workouts. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool, hitting the heavy bag, and it was like a release stress, and it was a good workout, and you feel confident about yourself. So yeah, and then I started watching more boxing, and then that's all I did for a while. It was just YouTube, all the fights from the past that I missed out on, and I realized there were so many great Mexican fighters, and yeah, to this day on the weekends that's what we do. And with now that they have the DAZN, there's fights almost every week. So we're over at my cousin's house very often, and mostly boxing, but also MMA every now and then. But yeah, more like as a fan nowadays.
No, that's great. I like first of all, you brought up the bringing boxing into your workout. Coming from a football background, getting away from those kinds of things, and then like, hey, well, boxing is a good workout. You feel confident about yourself. Again, that heavy bag is great. People don't understand that it's like a really good combination of cardio and strength training in one workout. And so
definitely
great for your heart. Great for your lungs, things like that. And you've also brought up watching it as a fan, and specifically Mexican-American boxing, the Zone, you pay your subscription, all sorts of fights every week.
Right.
So, and going in that YouTube rabbit hole, right, and finding out, this person fought this person, let me go down there.
Oh, yeah.
So anything in the history of like Mexican-American boxing, or a match maybe you remember or rewatch or missed and watch?
Well, I think for a while it was mostly like understanding who the first Chavez was, Julio, and
of course,
and what he meant to Mexicans Americans, and De La Hoya, what he meant to Chicanos and everybody, and Canelo, what he means now, I think, and just dominating, and just there's like a lineage there. And even before all that, my father would tell me about, I think it was like Pepe el Toro, and that's what they used to call me that growing up, Pepe el Toro.
There we go.
And I think he was a boxer.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this just been a rich tradition, and there's a pride thing there, you know what I mean? And we're not the biggest guys in the world, but like they go down swinging, you know what I mean? So the Mexican style it fights forward, So there's like a bravery thing there, and yeah, it's great theater, and it's great. I think I actually wrote a series of poems about boxing.
Oh wow!
One of them, for like the different styles. I had the boxer puncher, I had the pure boxer, the brawler.
Nice.
And the last one was the swarmer. And I published a few of those. I actually took it out of my full length manuscript though, because I was afraid that I was scaring off the editors, you know?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. And it may not fit with that kind of manuscript, but that's cool that you have some of them out there, and you still got probably others, and they might go somewhere else where that is something you are trying to explore and go for. Yeah.
I also have a series of baseball prose poems that I did with a similar concept with the shortstop and the catcher and the pitcher, and those were published in Hobart. So those are online.
Magazine. Yeah. Very cool. That's great, man. No, I like that. I like anytime boxing goes into poetry. I find it as a weirdly poetic sport. Of all the sports and combat sports, it's really beautiful in a certain way.
An art to it. I will say that initially, when I started reading and writing, my instinct was to reject sports and football and what I grew up with, and I stopped watching sports. I just thought like that was not. That it was toxic and violent, and
right,
and then as years passed, I started more using it for exercise and getting back into it. I think, initially sometimes we have this idea of what we think artists should be, or certain stereotypes, things like that.
Right, yeah, and that there maybe isn't so much overlap as we think, and
right,
and there is a lot of not good stuff and bad people in these sports, and
and
there is negative, toxic things in those worlds. But yeah, I get you that with a certain amount of maturity and a critical eye, you can start to observe these things, and then look at some of the beauty outside of the violence, like you were talking about this lineage of Mexican or Mexican American fighters, and mentioning Julio Cesar Chavez, Oscar De La Hoya, right, the Golden Boy, and then right now Canelo. We have these certain kind of benchmarks. We're always there. There's always tons of Mexican world champions, But then there's these kind of like worldwide sensations, and everybody's like, wow, Mexicans are the best boxers, you know? So it's been pretty cool to see that over several generations now, you know, people our age.
And even the way it carries to the neighborhoods around here where I'm living, just like every weekend there's a fight and families get together and you have a barbecue and you watch the fight and you put up some bets and have a couple brews, you know? So
yeah,
it's like, it's a way to, you know, spend certain time in the weekends, I think.
Yeah, it's like people do, you know, like, you know, American football every Sunday kind of thing. It's like, well, we can get together damn near every Saturday and watch some fights if we want to, you know?
Exactly. Yep.
Very cool, man. Hey, well, thanks again for reading from the Fire Eater. We will direct people to that. What do you got as far as plugs? Where can people keep up with you? Do you got social media, website? Where can we buy this book? Let us know.
Yeah. I'm actually working on a website right now. It should be, I think next month it'll be up. And you can find me on Twitter at Jose Hernandez DZ, and as well as Instagram. And so, yeah, mostly online. And the book is available through Texas Review Press and your local bookstores, hopefully. And like I said, I'm still working on the next two, so hopefully those will be out soon.
Great. We will direct people to your social media. That way we can see when your next manuscripts drop and where we can purchase those. Again, thank you, Jose Hernandez Diaz. Great poet, prose poet, calling from California. Thanks a lot, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time. And I like the mix that you have going on with the fight, the boxing, and the literature, and very interesting concept you got going. So I appreciate it.
No, yeah, great. It was a roll of the dice, but it seems to be working out so far, Jose. So we appreciate you listening and appreciate you coming on the show.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to that interview with Jose Hernandez Diaz. Great poet, writer, and editor. All-around good dude. Great conversation about writing and that book. Great experience hearing him read some poems from the Fire Eater. If you want to keep up with him and see when his next books come out, follow him on Twitter at Jose Hernandez Diaz. He's also on Instagram, Jose_HDZ_DZ. There's going to be links to those in the show notes, in the details. Also, pick up the Fire Eater from Texas Review Press. There's going to be a link in the show notes where you can buy that directly from Texas A&M University Press. $16.95 paperback, great book. As far as the podcast, you guys know the drill. Follow us on social media. Keep up that way. Subscribe on your favorite podcast apps. If you have somebody in your life that might be into the writing stuff or into the fighting stuff, send them a link. Stay tuned next week. Next week, I have English-Australian writer Jenny Valentish talking about our new book. So stay tuned next week, y'all. Until then, be good, be safe, take care of each other.